Hey everyone! Before we dive in, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You don't want to miss what happens next, trust me. Now let's dive into the story. Max never knew one small moment in a crowded place could destroy his whole future, but that day was coming fast, and he had no idea it was his own laugh that would bring it. Years ago, Max was already rich, confident, and used to getting whatever he wanted. People called him arrogant, but he didn't care. He was used to being the center of attention. But then he met Aaliyah, and everything began to change. Aaliyah worked at a small library in the city. She loved books more than anything, and she didn't care about money, fancy cars, or loud men who thought they owned the world. She kept to herself, helping visitors find books and keeping her quiet little corner organized. That day, she didn't even notice Max when he walked in, looking sharp in his expensive suit. Max, however, noticed her immediately. There was something different about her. She didn't fawn over him. She didn't even look impressed. That lack of attention made him curious, almost obsessed. "Excuse me," Max said, leaning casually on a nearby shelf. "Do you know where I can find books on business?" Aaliyah looked up at him calmly. "They're on aisle 3, she said, pointing. She didn't smile. She didn't ask his name. She didn't care. Max had never met anyone like that before. Usually, people fawned, they smiled, they laughed. But Aaliyah, she was different. She had fire in her calmness, a quiet strength that pulled him closer without him even realizing it. He started visiting the library more often, pretending to need books he didn't care about. Each time, he tried to impress her with jokes, stories, even small gifts. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she rolled her eyes. But every smile made him fall a little deeper. Weeks turned into months, and Max couldn't imagine his life without Aaliyah. She was simple, grounded, and the only person who seemed to see the real him, not the millionaire everyone else admired. Finally, he asked her out. She said yes. And that's how their story began, a story that would eventually lead to marriage, heartbreak, and a twist Max would never see coming. Max couldn't stop thinking about Aaliyah. Every morning, he found himself walking past the library, pretending he had errands or business to take care of. Every evening, he found excuses to sit nearby, hoping to catch a glimpse of her finishing her work. Aaliyah noticed him, of course. She didn't trust him at first. He was loud, arrogant, and used to being the center of attention. But over time, she saw moments of kindness in him, the way he helped a little boy reach a high shelf, or how he quietly paid for a visitor's lost book find without anyone noticing. Their conversations started small. Books, hobbies, simple things. But slowly, laughter began to fill the gaps between words. Max loved her laugh more than anything else he had ever heard. It wasn't forced. It didn't depend on wealth or status. It was pure, and it made him feel alive in a way money never could. One evening, after weeks of small talks and shared coffees, Max finally took a risk. "Aaliyah," he said, voice shaking slightly even though he tried to hide it. "I know I've been a little annoying, but I can't stop thinking about you. Would you go out with me?" Aaliyah paused, her eyes studying him carefully. She saw his sincerity, the way he wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. At least, not entirely. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. One dinner. That dinner changed everything. They talked for hours, sharing dreams, fears, and stories from their past. Max had never felt so connected to anyone, and Aaliyah had never met someone who made her feel seen. Weeks turned into months, and their relationship grew stronger. Max tried to show her a different side of his world, quiet dinners at luxury rooftops, drives in cars she didn't care about, gifts she politely declined. But what mattered to Aaliyah wasn't the wealth. It was that he listened, really listened. Eventually, Max proposed. Not in a flashy way. Not in front of crowds or cameras. He took her to the park where they had their first real conversation, got down on one knee, and asked her to marry him. Aaliyah said yes. Their wedding was small, simple, and full of love. Aaliyah wore a plain white dress. Max promised to never let money or power change him. They were happy for a while. But happiness doesn't always last. As Max's business grew, his attention shifted. Friends who valued wealth over people crept back into his life. They whispered subtly about Aaliyah's simplicity, about how she didn't belong in his high-class world. Max didn't argue. He didn't defend her. Slowly, without noticing, he began to drift away. Dinner dates were missed. Conversations ignored. Moments that once felt full of love became tense silences. Aaliyah tried to reach him, tried to remind him of the promises he had made, but Max was too busy chasing attention and power. Then came the night she prepared a surprise dinner. Candles lit, tables set beautifully. She waited hours. Max never showed. He returned late, laughing with friends who barely knew her name. She looked at him quietly, feeling the final weight of their love fall away. She realized that the man she once adored was no longer the same. 3 months later, the divorce papers lay on the table. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She left silently, reclaiming her life with grace. Max laughed with his friends, pretending he didn't notice how empty his house had become. Aaliyah moved forward, quietly building herself up, step by step, day by day. She didn't care about revenge. Not yet. She only cared about becoming the person she was meant to be. And that's what made what happened next so perfect. Max couldn't take it. Not the divorce. Not the fact that Aaliyah had walked away without begging, without drama, without even looking back. Every night, he sat alone in his massive house, staring at the walls that once felt full of love and now only echoed emptiness. His ego, once so big it seemed unbreakable, had been bruised in ways he didn't know how to fix. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter. She left, he said aloud, pacing the floor of his enormous living room. Big deal. Plenty of women out there. Life goes on, but the truth clawed at him. Every time he saw her name in his memories, every time he remembered her laugh or the way she had looked at him, he felt smaller, weaker, almost invisible. Max's friends didn't help. Not even a little. Jake, one of his closest friends, burst into his apartment one evening, a wide grin on his face, holding a bottle of expensive champagne. "Man," Jake said, laughing so hard he almost fell over. "Aaliyah left you?" "Huh. You?" Humiliated by a library girl. Another friend, Peter, joined in. "Bro, we thought you were untouchable. You were supposed to have it all, money, looks, power, and then she just walks away. Priceless." Max tried to laugh too, but it came out forced, hollow, weak. The laughter of his friends sounded like knives against his skin. Instead of comforting him, it reminded him how small he felt, how foolish he had been. Every word, every chuckle, every mocking smile replayed in his mind over and over again. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. At work, his employees noticed a change in him. He was sharper, harsher, trying to reclaim control over everything he could, but the one thing he couldn't control, Aaliyah, haunted him. Max became obsessed with proving he was still untouchable. Not to Aaliyah, that would be impossible now, but to everyone else. Every meeting, every conversation, every social gathering was a chance to show the world he was still powerful, still in control. But deep down, he knew. Aaliyah had already won. She had walked away, rebuilt herself, and left him with nothing but his wounded pride and a hollow laugh. And that's why the moment in the crowded plaza, when he finally saw her again, was about to ignite something he couldn't have expected. Max was driving through the crowded plaza that morning, his expensive gray car gleaming under the sunlight. He was thinking about nothing in particular, just enjoying the control he felt over his life, the power, the wealth, the attention. But then he saw her. Aaliyah. She was walking calmly, holding her bags and a few books she had just purchased. She looked completely unaware of him, completely unaware of the car roaring toward her. Max felt a twisted thrill, a rush of reckless energy. For a moment, a dangerous thought crossed his mind. What if he startled her? What if he made her scramble? Max pressed the accelerator a little harder. The car surged forward. Aaliyah saw it too late. She froze for a second when the shadow of the vehicle loomed in front of her. Panic shot through her chest. Her mind screamed at her to move, but the crowd around her made it almost impossible to run safely. She tried to jump to the side to dodge the car, but her foot caught on the uneven edge of the pavement. Time seemed to slow. Her bags tumbled from her hands. Books and papers scattered across the road. She fell forward, hitting the hard ground with a thud that echoed in her ears. The people around gasped, some screamed. Aaliyah's heart pounded as she pressed herself closer to the ground, trying to make herself small, invisible. Max stopped a few meters ahead, his grin spreading across his face. Instead of concern, he felt triumph. He had scared her. He had humiliated her. Then he backed up slightly, rolled down his window, and laughed. Loudly, cruelly. He laughed as Aaliyah tried to gather her belongings, brushing dirt off her clothes, trying to compose herself in front of the shocked crowd. People stared, some whispering, some shaking their heads, but Max didn't care. He drove slowly past her, laughter echoing, pointing at her fall as if it were the funniest thing he had ever seen. Then, after a few moments of delight, he hit the accelerator and zoomed off down the plaza, still laughing, leaving Aaliyah on the ground, humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses. But Aaliyah didn't cry. She didn't scream. She took a deep breath, brushed the dust from her hands, and straightened her back. Inside her, something quiet but powerful ignited, a fire that Max could never imagine. He had laughed at her once, but the world had already begun turning, and tomorrow, it would be him who would tremble. Aaliyah sat on the edge of the curb, her palms pressing against the rough pavement, trying to steady her shaking hands. Her bags were ripped, books scattered, papers crumpled, and her shoes covered in dust. Around her, people whispered, some shaking their heads, some staring. But she didn't let their eyes make her small. She had survived worse. She took a slow, steady breath, letting the anger and embarrassment simmer quietly inside her. Max had laughed. The crowd had watched. But Aaliyah wasn't going to let that define her. Not anymore. She picked up her books, one by one, stacking them neatly even though her hands were trembling. Every paper she placed back into her bag felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Once her belongings were gathered, she looked up. Max's car was gone, his laughter still ringing in her ears, mocking her. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. His arrogant grin, the cruel echo of his laughter, his friends cheering him on. The humiliation burned sharply, but instead of breaking her, it sharpened her. She realized something vital. She didn't need revenge to feel strong. She didn't need to yell or fight. What she needed was control. What she needed was power. And she could build that, step by step, day by day. Aaliyah walked out of the plaza slowly, her back straight, her head held high. Every step felt deliberate, purposeful. People stared, but she didn't flinch. Inside her, a quiet plan began to form. She would rise. She would become someone Max could never laugh at again. Someone he would be forced to respect. Someone who held the power to decide his future. That evening, she went home to her small apartment. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, just clean, quiet, orderly. She laid out her scattered papers on the coffee table and started to make lists. Every goal she had ever wanted. Every skill she needed to improve. Every connection she needed to make. By the time the sun had set, Aaliyah had mapped out a plan to rebuild her life. She didn't know exactly how long it would take, but she knew one thing for certain. The woman who had fallen in the plaza today would never be the same again. Meanwhile, across town, Max celebrated. He boasted to his friends about the morning's incident, replaying it in his mind over and over. Did you see her? Ah, she fell right in front of everyone, he laughed. His friends cheered him on, laughing along, reinforcing his ego. But Max didn't realize that laughter could only last so long. The man who laughed at Aaliyah today had no idea that she was already taking the first steps toward a life he would one day have to answer to. Aaliyah spent the next weeks quietly, almost invisibly, building herself. She signed up for advanced courses, met with mentors, polished her skills, and networked with professionals in ways that Max could never imagine. She wasn't just preparing to be successful. She was preparing to be unstoppable. And while Max continued his life, arrogant and careless, the universe was quietly setting the stage for the moment he would finally face the consequences of laughing at the woman he had once loved, the woman who was becoming the new boss who would one day decide his future. Aaliyah's days became a careful balance of learning, networking, and planning. She woke up early every morning, long before the city stirred to life. Her small apartment, once quiet and lonely, became a headquarters of determination. Every corner held a notebook, every desk a plan, every file a goal. She signed up for courses in management, finance, and leadership, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. She reached out to mentors, people who had climbed from nothing to power, and listened to every story, every lesson, every warning. She took notes, memorized strategies, and quietly adapted them to her own plan. Her network grew slowly but surely. Aaliyah met people who could open doors, People who believed in hard work and integrity over money and connections. She never boasted about her past. She didn't need to. The world would notice her results, and that was far more powerful than any words. Meanwhile, Max lived in a world of arrogance and routine. He walked into boardrooms thinking charm and wealth could solve anything. He boasted about his morning entertainment with Aaliyah in the plaza, laughing to anyone who would listen. To him, she was still the woman who had stumbled and fallen. He didn't see the quiet revolution she was building. He didn't see the skills she was acquiring, the contacts she was making, the reputation she was carefully constructing. Every day that passed, Aaliyah's influence grew, and Max remained blind to it. One evening, Aaliyah received an unexpected offer. A mid-sized but rapidly growing company needed a leader to take it to the next level. They had heard of her skills, her integrity, and her sharp mind. She accepted the position, not with arrogance, but with a quiet confidence that made everyone around her feel the weight of her presence. Within months, she transformed the company. Processes improved, profits soared, employees respected her, and competitors took notice. Her reputation became unstoppable. She was no longer the woman people underestimated. She was the woman everyone had to respect. Max, on the other hand, continued to live in his bubble. He chased deals, attended parties, and flaunted his wealth. He never imagined that the woman he laughed at, the woman who had fallen in the plaza, would rise to a position of power, a position that could one day control his career, his decisions, his life. Aaliyah never forgot that morning in the plaza. Every achievement, every successful deal, every employee she empowered became part of a silent, inevitable plan. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was creating destiny. And that destiny was about to collide with Max in a way he would never see coming. Months passed, and Aaliyah's influence grew stronger every day. She became known as a sharp, intelligent leader who didn't just manage her company, she transformed it. Employees admired her, investors respected her, and competitors feared her. Every decision she made, every strategy she implemented, carried the weight of someone who had worked hard, been humiliated, and refused to ever be underestimated again. Meanwhile, Max remained completely oblivious. He strutted through life with the same arrogance as always. His friends laughed at his jokes, his employees followed his orders, and he thought everything was as it should be. He still bragged about that day in the plaza, telling anyone who would listen how Aaliyah had stumbled in front of a crowd, his laughter echoing in their ears. But fate has a way of moving quietly, preparing the perfect storm. Later that morning, Max made his way to the CEO office floor. He wanted to check in before the big meeting, thinking he could charm his way in, maybe even show off a little. He strutted down the polished corridor, expecting to see the usual administrative staff, secretaries hustling, assistants carrying papers, everyone bowing to the real boss. Then he saw her. It was Aaliyah. He recognized her immediately, the same woman from the plaza, the one he had laughed at months ago. But seeing her standing outside the CEO office holding a file, calm and confident, he couldn't make sense of it. Surely, she couldn't be the boss, he thought. She must be a new secretary or an intern. Ambitious, yes, but definitely misplaced on the CEO floor. He walked closer, trying to mask his surprise, and asked casually, "Hey, what are you doing here? This is the CEO's floor. Shouldn't you be somewhere else?" Aaliyah looked up calmly, her eyes locking onto his. She held the file firmly, and as Max glanced down, he noticed the word stamped clearly on its cover, "New Boss." It hit him like a punch to the chest. Every whispered conversation he had overheard, every respectful nod from employees, every subtle acknowledgement of her authority, it all suddenly made sense. She wasn't just an assistant or a secretary. She wasn't someone below him. She was the one with the power to control his future. Max froze, his heart pounding. His ego, already wounded from the divorce and past humiliations, now shattered further. Words escaped him. Every boast, every confident thought of superiority, crashed against the reality of her authority. Aaliyah, calm and composed, closed the file and looked at him once more. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of tension, anticipation, and the unspoken truth. Max was about to face consequences he had never imagined. Max followed Aaliyah into the boardroom, trying to maintain the same arrogant posture he always carried. He forced a confident smile, pretending everything was normal, but inside his heart pounded. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the floor itself was reminding him who was really in control. The room was filled with senior employees, investors, and managers, all waiting for the meeting to begin. They turned politely as Aaliyah entered, and every eye immediately focused on her. She walked calmly, every movement precise, every step commanding respect. Max cleared his throat, trying to make a joke. "So, this is the new boss I keep hearing about, huh?" His voice wavered slightly, though he tried to hide it. Aaliyah didn't answer immediately. She placed the file she had been holding on the table, closed it, and looked directly at him. Her gaze was steady, calm, and filled with an authority that made him feel small. "Yes, Max," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm the new CEO. And starting today, that includes overseeing your department." A shiver ran down Max's spine. The words hit him harder than he had expected. This was the woman he had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed in the plaza. The woman who had fallen in front of everyone and had seemed powerless was now the one holding all the power over him. Max tried to compose himself, but the reality of the situation made him stumble over his words. "Wait, this can't be." "How?" Aaliyah didn't let him finish. She turned to the team, giving clear, confident instructions. Everyone listened, taking notes, nodding, and responding without hesitation. The room hummed with productivity under her control. Max realized then that no one in the room doubted her authority, except him, and he was painfully aware that it was only his pride standing in the way of accepting the truth. He had laughed at her once. He had thought she was beneath him. But now the tables had turned completely. Every move she made reminded him of his humiliation. Every command she gave reminded him of the power she now held. Power to shape his career, his reputation, even his livelihood. Max felt the weight of her gaze on him. She didn't smile, didn't mock, didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough. He was finally seeing the woman he had underestimated for what she truly was. Unstoppable, brilliant, and in control. The entire boardroom watched quietly, sensing the tension between them, though no one spoke. Max's laughter from the plaza, his arrogance, his ego, it all felt meaningless now. Aaliyah had risen, stronger than he could ever have imagined, and he was powerless to stop it. And at that moment, he realized something he would never forget. The woman he had laughed at would now decide his future. Max sat at the table, his hands gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. He couldn't look away from Aaliyah. Every word she spoke, every instruction she gave, reminded him of the humiliation he had suffered in the plaza. Her calm authority filled the room, and for the first time in his life, Max felt powerless. He wanted to argue, to remind her of who he thought he was, to tell her that things could never be this way. But as he opened his mouth, he realized that no words could undo the reality. She wasn't the woman who had stumbled in public. She wasn't the woman he had dismissed. She was now the boss, the one in control of every decision that mattered. Aaliyah glanced at him briefly, just enough for him to feel the weight of her gaze. It wasn't cruel, but it carried a quiet warning. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to humiliate him further. She already had the upper hand. Max's mind raced. Every memory of their past flashed in his head, her laughter, the moments he had taken for granted, the day she had left him without a fight. And then the plaza, the fall. His laughter. The echo of it now made him cringe. That moment, once a source of arrogance and pride, had unknowingly planted the seed of his downfall. Meanwhile, Aaliyah continued the meeting with precision. Her words were measured, her tone calm, but every sentence carried authority. Employees responded instantly. Investors nodded. Max noticed how people naturally gravitated toward her decisions. They respected her. They feared making a mistake in her presence. And he was powerless to change it. The more he watched, the more a cold realization settled in his chest. Aaliyah had not only rebuilt herself, she had risen far above him. Every choice he had made to mock her, every laugh he had thrown at her, every moment he had underestimated her, now seemed like a step backward in a game he didn't even realize he was losing. Max's pride wanted him to react. His ego wanted him to challenge her, to reassert control. But he couldn't. Every attempt at arrogance would be meaningless here. Aaliyah didn't need to prove herself. Her presence, her competence, her sheer calm power did that for her. And in that moment, Max understood a truth he could never forget. The woman he had humiliated was now the one deciding his future. Every move he would make from now on will be under her watchful eyes. For the first time in his life, Max felt fear. Not of failure. Not of losing money. But of Aaliyah. After the initial introductions and briefings, Aaliyah turned her attention directly to Max. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone sensed the tension. She didn't smile. She didn't mock. She simply looked at him, calm and composed, with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. "Max," she said, her voice steady, "I need you to prepare a full report on last quarter's client accounts. I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning, and I expect it to be thorough. No shortcuts, no excuses." Max blinked. He had expected her to assign him to a team, or perhaps to oversee a project from a distance. But she was treating him like any other employee, someone who had to work to prove their worth. His ego bristled. Prepare a report? Me? He thought. After everything? Sure, he managed, trying to mask his disbelief. I can do that." Aaliyah nodded once, then turned back to address the rest of the team. Max opened his mouth to protest, to remind her who he was, but the words stuck in his throat. The more he looked at her, the more he realized that arguing or showing anger would do nothing but expose his weakness. She held all the power now, and she knew it. He glanced around the room, noting the polite, professional expressions of the employees. No one laughed at him. No one whispered. But every pair of eyes carried subtle acknowledgement. Aaliyah was in charge, and Max had no choice but to comply. He swallowed hard and quietly walked to his office. The weight of the report, the humiliation, and the realization of his new place in the hierarchy pressed down on him like a physical force. His mind raced, trying to figure out how he could regain even a fraction of control. But the truth was unavoidable. Aaliyah had already won. Sitting at his desk, Max stared at the blank report template on his computer. He could still hear her voice in his head, calm and commanding. He could still see her standing there outside the CEO office, holding that file with quiet authority. For the first time, he truly understood the consequences of underestimating someone. The woman he had laughed at, mocked, and humiliated was now the one shaping his future. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Outside, Aaliyah moved through the office with quiet efficiency. Every instruction she gave, every decision she made, reminded Max of the gulf between them. She wasn't seeking revenge, but her presence alone was enough to make him feel the weight of every past mistake, every arrogant laugh, every moment he had dismissed her. Max clenched his fists. Pride, shame, and fear warred within him. He had always believed money and influence could solve everything, but now he was learning a lesson far more important. Power wasn't about wealth. It was about respect, intelligence, and control. And Aaliyah had all of it. Max sat at his desk long after the office lights dimmed. The blank screen of the report stared back at him, unforgiving. Numbers, client accounts, and projections that once seemed routine now felt like a mountain he couldn't climb. Every time he thought he had organized his thoughts, he remembered Aaliyah's calm gaze from earlier, the way she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't mocked him, but had made him feel his place below her. He tried to call a few colleagues for help, but they were cautious, professional, and polite. No one offered unsolicited guidance. No one joked at his expense, but every nod, every professional acknowledgement reminded him silently. Aaliyah was in charge, and he was expected to follow. Hours passed. His hands ached from typing. His eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets and graphs. Every now and then, he glanced at the clock, then at the CEO office door. He imagined her walking past, observing him silently. The thought made him clench his jaw. How did it come to this? He asked himself. How did I, Max, end up reporting to her? Meanwhile, Aaliyah moved through the office effortlessly. She reviewed files, made strategic decisions, and guided her team with quiet authority. She didn't glance at Max or call attention to him, but her very presence reminded him of the gulf between them. He had once laughed at her, but now she didn't need to laugh. Her competence, her calm control, did all the work for her. By the time Max finally completed the report, exhaustion and frustration weighed on him like chains. He walked to her office, report in hand, trying to maintain some semblance of pride. Aaliyah looked up from her desk, glanced at the report, and nodded. Good, she said simply, her tone neutral but firm. I'll review this and get back to you if there are corrections. Max swallowed. The single word, good, carried more weight than any insult could have. There was no praise, no acknowledgement of his past status, no concession to his former power. Only authority. He turned to leave, humiliated, but he couldn't help noticing the respect and attention Aaliyah commanded from everyone in the room. Investors, managers, employees. All treated her as the one who mattered. Not him. Not his wealth. Not his name. Not his charm. Max realized, with a sinking feeling, that the world he had once ruled with arrogance had shifted. And the woman he had once humiliated, the woman who had fallen in the plaza, the woman he had laughed at, had risen to a place where she now held every advantage. That night, Max couldn't sleep. His mind replayed every mistake, every arrogance-fueled laugh, every moment he had underestimated her. Aaliyah hadn't needed revenge, hadn't yelled or humiliated him openly. She had simply risen, built her power, and put him in a position where he had no choice but to respect her authority. For the first time in his life, Max understood the meaning of true power. And tomorrow, he knew, Aaliyah would remind him again, in every subtle glance, in every instruction, in every decision, who was really in control. The next morning, Max arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to get ahead of the tasks Aaliyah might assign. He sat at his desk, reviewing the report he had delivered the previous night, mentally preparing himself for whatever she might throw at him next. Pride, shame, and fear churned together in his chest, making it hard to focus. Aaliyah appeared at the doorway, holding another file. Her presence instantly quieted the office. Employees paused their conversations, investors looked up, and even the most confident managers straightened in their chairs. She walked toward him with calm purpose, every step deliberate, every motion controlled. "Max," she said, her voice neutral but sharp, "I've reviewed your report. There are a few gaps and inconsistencies I need you to correct. I also need a full client presentation prepared by the end of the day. It must be flawless. No errors, no excuses, and it will be delivered in front of the board tomorrow morning." Max's stomach sank. He had been in boardrooms countless times, but this time it wasn't just a presentation. He was presenting under her authority, accountable to the very woman he had humiliated and underestimated. His mind raced. This is impossible. I can't fail, but I can't mess up either. He tried to hide his panic behind a forced calm. "Of course," he said, his voice tighter than he intended. "I'll make sure it's perfect." Aaliyah nodded once, giving no further instruction, and walked back to her office. Every eye in the room followed her, every movement commanding respect. Max felt the weight of their gazes on him. Even the senior managers, who once would have deferred to his experience and charm, now expected him to follow her lead without question. Max opened the file and began working feverishly. Every number, every statistic, every slide needed perfect alignment. The office was silent except for the quiet hum of computers and the occasional click of a mouse. His hands shook slightly as he typed, reviewing every detail multiple times. The pressure was suffocating, and every second reminded him of Aaliyah's presence and authority. As he worked, he couldn't help but remember the plaza, the fall, his laughter, the humiliation. Now that moment seemed trivial compared to this. Back then, he had mocked her publicly, believing himself untouchable. Today, he was the one trembling under her gaze, accountable for every mistake. By the afternoon, Max had completed the presentation. He printed copies, double-checked every figure, and rehearsed his delivery in front of the mirror in the office hallway. Every word, every gesture, every detail mattered. Aaliyah had given him no shortcuts, no leniency, and no sympathy, only authority. When the boardroom doors opened, Max walked in, papers in hand, heart racing. Aaliyah was already at the head of the table, calm, composed, and radiating control. Every person in the room looked to her for direction, even before he began speaking. As he began presenting, he realized something that made his stomach churn. The more he spoke, the more he understood the depth of Aaliyah's influence. She had transformed the company, gained the respect of everyone in the room, and now she was subtly guiding him, correcting mistakes before he even noticed them. Max's confidence, once unshakable, had evaporated. Every pause, every correction, every pointed glance from Aaliyah reminded him of the tables that had turned. The man who had laughed at her in the plaza was now the man learning under her scrutiny. By the end of the presentation, Max was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Aaliyah nodded once, approving the work he had done, and turned her attention to the board. Max slumped slightly in his chair, realizing the truth. He was no longer in control. Aaliyah was, and there was nothing he could do but follow. For the first time, Max truly felt the consequences of underestimating someone. And Aaliyah, calm and composed as ever, had reminded him, subtly, quietly, and decisively, who was really in charge. The next week, Aaliyah's subtle control over Max became even clearer. She didn't berate him. She didn't humiliate him publicly. Instead, she assigned tasks that required precision, accountability, and constant attention, tasks that forced him to confront his mistakes, his arrogance, and the consequences of underestimating her. One morning, she approached his desk holding a folder, her expression calm, neutral. "Max," she said softly, "I need you to review these client contracts and identify any discrepancies. I want a detailed report on my desk by the end of the day." Max tried to keep his tone casual, masking the dread curling in his stomach. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. He watched as she walked away, every step deliberate, radiating authority. Even in her absence, he felt the weight of her presence. As he pored over the contracts, Aaliyah's influence was evident. She had structured the company in a way that left no room for error, no room for shortcuts. Every employee respected her, every manager deferred to her judgment, and Max was painfully aware that he was now accountable to her in every way. Throughout the day, he noticed small things that reminded him of how far he had fallen. Employees who had once looked up to him now followed her instructions without hesitation. Managers who had once deferred to his experience now sought her approval first. Even the board members, once charmed by his wealth and reputation, now listened to her guidance above all else. By mid-afternoon, Max's frustration began to rise. He wanted to argue, to assert himself, to remind everyone of his previous power and influence. But Aaliyah had created an environment where that was impossible. Her calm competence, her quiet authority, and her respect for the team left him powerless to resist. When he finally delivered the report, Aaliyah glanced at it briefly, nodding. "Good work, Max. A few minor corrections, but overall, this is exactly what I needed." Her words were simple, professional, yet Max felt a sharp pang of humiliation. The praise was measured, not effusive. There was no indulgence, no recognition of his past status, no acknowledgement of his ego. She had reminded him subtly, quietly, and decisively he was no longer the one in charge. That evening, Max sat at his desk, exhausted, reflecting on the week. He realized that every task Aaliyah had given him, every subtle correction, every instance of her calm guidance had a purpose. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was demonstrating control. She was showing him exactly what it meant to be accountable, to respect authority, and to understand that power wasn't about arrogance or wealth. It was about competence, integrity, and vision. For the first time, Max truly understood the magnitude of his mistake. The woman he had mocked, laughed at, and underestimated was now the one shaping his career, guiding his actions, and quietly reminding him of every misstep he had made in the past. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted but awake in a way he had never been before. Aaliyah's authority wasn't just in her position. It was in every action, every decision, and every quiet, measured move she made. And Max knew, deep in his chest, that there was no going back. It was Friday morning, and the atmosphere in the office was tense. Aaliyah had called for a special team meeting. Max arrived early, trying to mentally prepare himself, though he knew nothing could prepare him for what was coming. Aaliyah stood at the head of the conference table, calm, poised, radiating authority. The room was filled with senior employees and board members. Everyone was attentive, waiting for her instructions. Max's heart pounded in his chest. He had a sense that this was going to be different, that this was going to test him in a way he could never have imagined. Today, Aaliyah began, her voice steady. "We're going to review the client acquisition project. I want everyone's contributions on the table. Max, you will lead the presentation for your department and walk us through the strategies and results from last quarter." Max froze for a moment, leading the presentation in front of the board and his peers, while Aaliyah, the woman he had mocked, stood as the authority overseeing him, sent a wave of dread through him. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. "Of course," he said, his voice tight. He grabbed his notes and walked to the front of the room, feeling the eyes of the team drilling into him. Every whisper, every glance reminded him he was under her authority. Every movement he made would be scrutinized. As Max began the presentation, Aaliyah observed silently. She didn't intervene unless necessary, but her presence was enough to keep him tense, careful, and painfully aware of every flaw. His voice faltered once or twice. His hands shook slightly as he gestured toward charts and graphs. He realized how much his confidence had vanished. The arrogance he once carried so effortlessly was gone. Halfway through, Aaliyah asked a few precise questions about certain client accounts. Her tone wasn't mocking, but every question highlighted gaps in his work. Max tried to respond quickly, but each answer reminded him that he was no longer in control. Every error, every hesitation, every stutter felt magnified under her calm gaze. The board and employees listened attentively, nodding at Aaliyah's clarifications. Max felt a burning humiliation rising in his chest. He had laughed at her in the plaza. He had thought her weak, underestimated her abilities. And now here he was, faltering in front of everyone, under the scrutiny of the very woman he had once mocked. When he finished, Aaliyah spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you, Max. I appreciate your effort. There are a few corrections to be made, which I'll need by the end of the day. I know you'll handle them." The room was silent for a moment, then work resumed. Max walked back to his seat, his face flushed, his mind racing. He realized something profound. The humiliation wasn't cruel or petty. It was the natural consequence of underestimating someone. Aaliyah hadn't raised her voice, hadn't mocked him publicly, yet she had made him feel the full weight of his arrogance and mistakes. Max sat quietly, staring at his notes. Pride, fear, and respect warred within him. He knew he could no longer rely on charm or wealth. He had to follow, learn, and adapt, or risk further embarrassment. And for the first time, Max truly understood. The woman he had laughed at, the woman he had once dismissed, was now the one shaping his destiny. The realization was bitter, humbling, and unavoidable. And Aaliyah, calm as ever, had only just begun to show him what true authority meant. The following week, the office hummed with quiet energy. Max tried to carry himself with his usual confidence, but it felt hollow now. Every glance toward Aaliyah reminded him she was the one in control. She moved through the office effortlessly, every step measured, every word respected. Max's presence, once commanding, now seemed small by comparison. That afternoon, Max finally found himself alone with Aaliyah outside her office. She was reviewing a file, calm and composed, completely unaware, or perfectly aware, of the storm brewing inside him. He swallowed hard. "Aaliyah, can I speak with you?" His voice betrayed a mix of disbelief, hesitation, and something he hadn't felt in a long time: humility. Aaliyah looked up slowly, her gaze steady. "Yes, Max." He hesitated, searching for words that could somehow regain even a shred of his former pride. But he found none. All the arrogance, all the charm, all the confidence he once relied on evaporated in her presence. I didn't expect." His words faltered, trailing off. He could feel the weight of months of underestimation, every laugh he had thrown at her in the plaza, every sneer, every dismissal. Aaliyah closed the file, placing it neatly on her desk. "You didn't expect what?" she asked softly, but there was no mockery in her tone. Only calm, quiet authority. "That you would rise this high," he admitted finally. I underestimated you." I laughed, and he stopped, shame flooding him. The memory of the plaza, his laughter, and her fall now burned painfully in his mind. Aaliyah studied him silently for a moment, then spoke. "Max, this isn't about revenge. It's about respect. You laughed at me once, yes, but I never stopped working. I never stopped learning. I never stopped believing in myself. You let arrogance guide you, and that's why you are here, realizing the consequences." Max lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Every word she spoke carried the weight of truth. For the first time, he understood the depth of his mistakes, the arrogance of his past, and the power of a woman who refused to be underestimated. Aaliyah's tone softened slightly. "I'm not here to humiliate you. I am here to lead. But part of leadership is making people see reality, and this is your reality, Max." He exhaled slowly, feeling the crushing weight of humility, the bitter taste of his former pride, and the undeniable truth: Aaliyah was in control. She had risen while he had laughed, underestimated, and mocked. For the first time, Max felt something he hadn't felt in years: respect. Not forced respect, not polite respect, real, undeniable respect for the woman who had transformed her fall into power, her humiliation into authority. Aaliyah returned to her file calmly, leaving Max standing there. No words, no mockery, just quiet dominance. Max realized then that the humiliation he had feared was nothing compared to the lesson she had silently taught him. Power, respect, and success were earned, not inherited, not flaunted, and never to be underestimated. And in that moment, Max accepted it. He had lost his arrogance. He had lost his pride. But in doing so, he had finally found the truth about strength, authority, and the woman who had quietly become unstoppable. The tables had turned, and Aaliyah had won without ever raising her voice. Weeks later, the office hummed with energy, efficiency, and quiet respect. Aaliyah moved through her company with calm authority, every decision precise, every step measured. Her team followed her lead willingly, inspired by her competence and vision. She had become more than a CEO. She was a force no one could ignore. Max, meanwhile, had changed. Gone was the arrogance that once defined him. Gone was the confidence built on wealth and charm alone. He carried himself differently now, careful, respectful, and quietly aware of the woman who had transformed not just the company, but him. He still worked hard, still delivered results, but there was a humility in his actions he had never known before. Every glance at Aaliyah reminded him of the plaza, of the laughter he had thrown, of the fall he had ignored. That memory, once a source of pride, now served as a lesson, a constant reminder that underestimating someone can have consequences far beyond what one imagines. Aaliyah, aware of his presence and the subtle shift in his demeanor, never mocked him. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence she carried, the respect she commanded from everyone around her, was enough to keep Max mindful of his place. One afternoon, as Max passed her office, Aaliyah looked up from her files and offered a simple nod. No words, no judgment, just acknowledgement. Max returned the nod, a small but genuine gesture, and continued on his way. It was a silent understanding between them. The past was behind them, but the lessons remained. Aaliyah had risen, Max had learned, and the power dynamic had forever shifted. The world had changed for Max, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to respect strength, intelligence, and perseverance. And Aaliyah? She simply smiled to herself, knowing she had won without ever needing to raise her voice, without ever needing to laugh back. She had let her work, her determination, and her quiet authority speak for her, and it had spoken louder than anything Max could have imagined. The tables had turned. The lesson had been learned. And the woman who had once stumbled in public had become unstoppable. Wow, what a story. If you thought arrogance could get away with everything, think again. Aaliyah showed us all that strength, intelligence, and persistence always win in the end. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Stories full of suspense, drama, and powerful life lessons. And remember, it's not always the loudest or richest who wins. Sometimes it's the quiet, unstoppable ones who rise above it all. What would you have done if you were Max? Could you handle seeing someone you once laughed at become your boss? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to see your reactions.